I loved the little anchor Bible picture books of the Bible stories. Daniel in the lion's den, Noah's ark, Samson in the temple, the disciples fishing on the sea. The stories showed people in trouble, fighting lions, stilling storms, swallowed by fish, and then God would intervene and rescue them. Isn't that the kind of story we all like to hear? Lots of adventure with the reassurance of a happy ending. I love those stories, and I shared them with my children as they were growing up because I wanted them to know that there was a God who loved them and cared for them and knew them. As I grew older as a child, I started to question those stories. Can a fish really swallow a person? Can you really make a storm go away by shouting at it? Does getting a haircut rob you of your strength? Years later, as my children grew older, they too began to ask the same kind of questions. As we grow older, we question the stories, and it's a good thing. If we didn't question them, we start believing in a magical God, a God that will prevent all bad things from happening, a God that will do our bidding if we ask hard enough or often enough. We pray for healing or rescue or redemption from specific problems or situations and make our magical God directly responsible for all the outcomes. That God will heal grandma or not heal grandma. That God will give us a horsey or not give us a horsey. That God will make sure that our little secret is hidden or that it is exposed for all to see. And we have the idea that our magical God decides what is due to us based on whether we are good enough or whether we have asked well enough. As we grow older, if we haven't learned to give up our magical God, we think that God is responsible to get us a job or not get us a job, to give us cancer or not give us cancer, to heal the cancer or not heal the cancer. And again, the result is our responsibility, our fault. That's what it's like to have a magical God. It took me a while to notice it, but did you ever notice that our magical God lets us down 50% of the time? Do you remember when you stopped believing in a magical God? When my pet rabbit died, the most beloved pet I will ever have in my life, I was in the 4th grade. I prayed and I prayed and I prayed that it wasn't true, that she wasn't dead, that she'd come back to life. God has heard no more pious or urgent prayers than that 4th grade boy. But it didn't change. The magic did not happen. She was still dead. My magical God had let me down. Do you remember when that first happened to you? Maybe it was the death of a family member. Maybe it happened as a result of bullying or abuse. Maybe you just noticed that bad things happen to good people like you, and no amount of magical, wishful thinking or prayer seemed to change that fact. It's normal at that moment to get angry with our magical God, and that anger often leads to apathy, and soon you don't feel like praying or worshiping at all because all of our faith and all of our praying can't make up for the failure of our magical God. Does that sound like you? Like one of your kids? Like somebody you know? For many of us, that's when we lost our magical God, and let's say it plainly, we needed to lose our magical God. When I was a child, I thought like a child, I spoke like a child, I reasoned like a child. When I became an adult, I gave up childish things. That's how the Apostle Paul puts it. Perhaps you have witnessed or experienced the danger of never giving up the childish faith, of not maturing into something deeper and more adult than a belief in a magical God. Perhaps you know somebody who still believes in a magical God, and the anger, judgment, blaming, and shaming that can come from holding on too long to a childish faith. Once I had left the magical God behind, what came next for me was the other God. The one who is out there, watching us from a distance. This God designed everything ages and ages ago. This is what the theists, like our founding fathers, referred to as the watchmaker God, who designed the mechanism of the universe, wound it all up, and set it in motion before stepping away from our daily lives. This is the God that I looked for on a cloudless night, staring up into the stars, contemplating the immensity of it all. This is the faraway God, kind of a emeritus professor of creation, who has no real duties anymore but to receive credit and occasional accolades for all that she has accomplished in the past. Or maybe an especially gifted postdoc might get the rare audience, but mostly the emeritus God, the faraway God, is sitting in a celestial armchair somewhere far away and puffing on a pipe or sipping a cup of tea. I certainly got a sense of order from believing in this faraway God, the one who was not the magical God, the one who was a kind of emeritus God. And I got a sense of the immensity and even majesty of the universe. But of course, you don't pray because the faraway God doesn't seem to care about you or your plans. And being uninvolved really in the day-to-day things of life, the faraway God really doesn't have anything relevant to say about your hopes or your struggles. You just go about your business. You rely on your own devices. You don't give much thought to the faraway God other than to acknowledge that there certainly is such a thing out there, somewhere, maybe at the beginning of time or something. I don't have a sense that there was a specific moment when I stopped believing in the faraway God. I think it's when I could no longer untie the knots that my life and me had become tied into, when it became clear that the things that really mattered to me were beyond my power to cause or control. Even living a privileged life as an adolescent and in college, I found myself frequently gloomy, even depressed. Love was something that I could receive from my family, but I had no real idea how to feel it and to experience it for myself. I wondered what my gifts were for, if there was any larger purpose to being me. You may have found other and more serious reasons to give up on the faraway God. Perhaps you experienced your life or the lives of a loved one as out of control, whether victimized by injustice or cruelty, or living in the chaos of your own creation. At those moments, the faraway God just does not cut it. We don't need a cold, distant, and uncaring presence to watch idly by while we descend into pain and confusion. I do not understand my own actions, for I do not do what I want, but I do the very thing I hate. Wretched man that I am, who will rescue me from this body of death? That's how the Apostle Paul describes this inner agony we feel when we cannot break free from the turmoil of our own sin, or we powerlessly witness the agony of another, whether it be a loved one or a whole community, even a nation held in thrall. Who will rescue me? Who will rescue us from this body of death? Certainly not the faraway God. So we are left in cycles of self-destructive behavior and systems that seem immune to improvement, This sounds a little bit like the kind of demonic possession present in our gospel reading this morning. A nation, Judea, powerlessly occupied by Roman forces. A homeless man living out in the tombs, the caves that serves as a graveyard and burial place, who continuously harms himself no matter what restraint is tried. And you know what that's like. Any of you have watched people enthralled by addiction, attempt after attempt fails. Interventions are tried, but they seem to make little impact. Treatments last for a while, but don't seem to stick. You know how it is, those of you who have devoted yourself to healing the community. When reasoned arguments fail time and again, facts are ignored. Even appeals to self-interest cannot overcome unreasoning prejudice or fear. But the chains he wrenched apart, and the shackles he broke in pieces, and no one had the strength to subdue him. That's when we need a third way, another kind of God with whom we can have a relationship. One who is neither magic genie or distant parent, but one who is a collaborative spirit, who is a partner in the deepest possible way in our lives. That's who comes to the demoniac in our reading this morning. What have you to do with me, Jesus, Son of the Most High God? It's odd, in this story, we're never quite sure if it's the demoniac, the man possessed, or the demon who is speaking. And we know what that's like. It was the liquor talking. That was my anxiety speaking. I was coming from a crazy place. The devil made me do it. But somewhere in the midst of all that legion of pain, confusion, doubt, and fear, the right question, the real question was asked. What's God got to do with me? And that's as much plea and prayer as it is question. And here comes Jesus, ready to heal, ready to partner with that poor homeless man, ready to empower this occupied, beleaguered countryside, ready to offer hope and healing. Jesus comes bearing a miracle, not magic. And if you don't know the difference between the two, then you need to do some thinking and praying and meditating about that. Jesus closes the distance between what had seemed a disinterested God and an abandoned people, and reaches out as flesh and blood presence to touch and transform. And they understand that their encounter with this third way God, this relational God, has changed them and given them a calling. And now comes what I asked you to look for, the reaction to Jesus' offer to partner with them in a new life and a new hope. Did you notice? The people of the neighborhood beg him to leave. They don't want to do it. They don't want to enter into partnership with Jesus. They ask him to leave them alone. Let's face it, they preferred their faraway God who did nothing for them and asked nothing from them in return. But the demoniac, the man who has been dispossessed and freed, he's ready to bust loose. He is ready to follow Jesus anywhere. And at the end of the story, Jesus lets him know that following Jesus means following God's way into the world, and gently aims the man's newfound faith and splendid enthusiasm back towards his own home, his own people, and his own region. That's the God of the third way, the God of loving relationship. In Jesus, we discover that God is not magic, but is mage, is wise. God knows what is needed in this world and trusts us to meet those needs. The God of relationship has given us gifts and power and graces and love and forgiveness and hope, all the things we need to do great things in the world. Given us trust given us space to grow and flourish, to become what we have been created to be. This is the God like a mother who holds us and then lets us go. This is the God like the Father who throws us up in the air and then catches us again. This is a grown-up God for a grown-up people. As I reflect on it now, the third way God, the God of loving relationship, has been there all along for me. She was there in my mother, who held me as I mourned the death of my rabbit and asked my first serious theological questions. He was there in my father, who showed me his own insecurity and sadness as he faced the tangled knots of middle age. God was there in my high school theater teacher, who believed in my gifts and gave me extraordinary opportunities to discover and develop them. Again and again in my life, the God of love has been present and partnered with me, nudging me along, picking me up, setting me off again to follow God's calling into the world. Not magic, but miraculous. Not far away, but intimate and caring. That's what God has to do with me and with each of us. And now we can pray again. Because isn't it easier to talk with a friend? Now we can worship again. Because there is a living presence beside us and inside us to fill us with light. And now what we do makes a difference. Not waiting for the magic to happen or despairing of our own ability to shape and control. Now we have a loving partner beside us in the God of love, who guides us, strengthens us, gifts us, and binds us with others, with all of us here in loving partnership. That's what God has to do with all of us. Amen.